Hey, it's Stephanie here, and today I have a card to share that features a fun background technique that I've created with a stencil and a fun new to me product called Goosebumps from Sukaneko. We'll get into that a little bit more in the video, but for now we just want to go ahead and create the background image. So I'm using the extra large dot stencil from Simon Says Stamp, and I went ahead and put some of this Krylon Easy Tack repositionable spray on it first, and this just helps to keep the stencil in place when you're using it. And more importantly, it helps when you're using any kind of wet medium over the stencil. This helps to keep that medium from going underneath the stencil where you don't want it. So it's super easy to put on, and it just gives like a little bit of a stick to your stencil and allows you to kind of temporarily position it onto your paper until you want to move it. And so now that I have that stuck down on my paper, I'm just going to go ahead and adhere it down to my craft sheet. I'm just using some painter's tape. This is frog tape for delicate surfaces, and it's by far my favorite painter's tape to use because it doesn't rip paper at all. Even if you go fast, it comes off just like butter. So I love, love, love this tape. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking some Distress ink. I'm using the mini Distress ink cubes as well as the round blending tool. And I'm just going ahead and applying color directly to the paper over top of the stencil. So I'm just going in a circular motion, kind of light at first until I get a base coat of color on, and then kind of darkening it up as I go. I want to have a nice even coverage of color when this is all finished. So I'm just speeding it up and just kind of going across the whole stencil. I want to completely cover this whole piece of paper with the pumice stone ink. And like I said, I want to get a nice even coverage. I don't want it to be too light, but I don't want it to be so dark that it almost looks black. I really want the gray color that this ink can exhibit come out. So I'm just going ahead and adding that until I'm satisfied with the color. And then once I have it exactly how I want it, I'm going to carefully peel off the stencil, and it comes off no problem. And then I'm going to take a adhesive remover. It's just like a little eraser tool, and I'm just going to kind of run over top of the whole piece, just in case any of that the repositionable adhesive kind of stuck down on my paper. I don't want it to end up staying there because I'm going to add more ink color, and it can kind of get gummy and make a mess of your background. So I always like to just remove that before I continue. So now I'm going ahead and laying my stencil back on top of my piece, but you can see here that I'm positioning it a little bit differently. I have a little bit of 3 different circles inside of the area that the stencil is going to allow me to color now. And this is just going to let me end up with a really cool background design that's just a little bit unique and just fun to do when you use stencils. So I definitely recommend trying to use stencils with more than one color and kind of move it around, and you can create some really fun patterns doing that. So as you can see here, I'm using a blue color now. This is Broken China, and I'm just going ahead and applying this fully over the stencil like I did with the pumice stone. Same, starting off kind of light and then adding some pressure to get it the same even color all the way around. And I'm just completely going across that whole paper and completely adding all of the color until I have the page completely covered. And you can kind of see the pattern that's forming here as we go ahead and add this blue color on. I just love the unique look to it. So now it's time to add the texture. So I'm going to be using this Goosebumps texture. There's spray as well, but this is actually a dabber bottle, which means it has a sponge top and you can kind of just apply it directly with the sponge. I prefer this over the spray just because you have better control over where you're putting the liquid when you're using it. I'm not very good with spray stuff, and I usually make a big mess, so I really prefer this. So I'm using the shimmer version. You can kind of see a little bit in the top part of the bottle as I'm moving around. You just want to shake that up really well to kind of blend it in with the liquid. And I usually like to go ahead with a paintbrush and open the bottle and kind of use a paintbrush to move that shimmer stuff around just to get it moving a little bit more, because it tends to like to stick to the bottom of the bottle. So I'm just taking my time and dabbing this over all of the blue circles that we've just inked up, and I'm just making sure that I don't miss any because I want to have it completely covered, and once I take the stencil off it'll be a little bit harder to reposition it back on. So once I have it all completely covered, I'm just going to go ahead and gently remove the stencil because it is still wet, and you just kind of want to lift a corner of it and hold the paper down with the edge of your finger. And just hold it in place as you lift off the stencil. And then once you get it off, you'll have this really great textury finish over top of just the blue circles and not the inside area of the gray circles or any of the white space. So hopefully you can see here in the camera as I tilt it, it's got like a shine and it's a little bit bumpy, and it has a really cool shimmer in it since I used the shimmer version. So now that it's completely dry, I let it sit for a little bit, and it actually dries super quick, so you don't have to wait a really long time for it to dry. So to create the rest of my card and add a sentiment, I decided to do some stamping on a piece of white paper that I've cut out with the wrap mailing label die from Simon Says Stamp. I was originally just going to die cut a sentiment out of black cardstock or gray cardstock and place it directly on top of the background, but it just ended up being too busy and too bold of color, and I just felt like the sentiment would get lost in that. So I decided to put it directly on white paper, die cut it out, and then adhere it directly on top. So I'm just using the Thinking of You sentiment stamp that comes in the Sending Happy Thoughts stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. This is one of my favorite sentiments just because it's got a really big size to it and it's a nice scripty font. So I really like it for cards like this where the background is kind of taking over the card and you don't want to do too much more detail when you're adding the sentiment on. So I'm just stamping that in Versamark ink and just adding some powder to my paper so that I don't get any embossing powder where I don't want it, since I'm going to be heat embossing this. And I'm just giving even pressure so that I get it fully stamped onto the piece of paper there. And then going ahead and adding some platinum embossing powder directly on top of the stamped area. So this is just a silver embossing powder. It's more of a warm silver, and when it is heat embossed, it looks very similar to the pumice stone color that we added to the background of the card. So I thought this would be a nice way to add a sentiment that wasn't too bold and would nicely match the background and not compete with it. And so to do the card base, I wasn't sure if I wanted to have 2 strips of black on each side or have a black border completely around the piece. So I kind of moved it around and ended up deciding to do the whole black border around it. So I trimmed that piece down so it was slightly smaller than a standard size card. And then I just went ahead and adhered the sentiment piece that I have already stamped directly onto the background that I've created. And when I positioned it on here, I kind of made a point to put it directly in between all of the colored area. I didn't actually let the white cardstock piece touch any white space. I just thought that that would help for it to make it stand out even more against that background. So I just went ahead and adhered that on, trimmed off the excess, and now it's going to fit perfectly on the card base. But before I went ahead and adhered that, I decided it was a little bit too plain still and I needed to add a little bit of something to tie in the background. So I'm going to use these holiday shape dies from Simon Says Stamp. These are probably my favorite heart dies ever, just because they are all the exact same shape, but you can get them in lots of different sizes, and they're just a really uniform heart shape that I really, really like. So I went ahead and cut them just out of black cardstock, the same cardstock that I use for the card base. And I'm just using my quick sticks tool to kind of pick them up and position them all around the card where I want them. And then I went ahead and adhered them on. And now I'm just adding some glitter to each of the hearts with my Wink of Stella glitter pen. And I'm being heavy with the glitter. As you can see, it's very heavily covering the black and kind of giving it a gray look. And that's what I wanted to do, just to make it so that they weren't so standoutish on the front of the card. And then once I had that done, I added some glossy accents to all of the hearts and let that dry, and then the card was finished. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.